I get the honors for today, introduce the Sheriff of Riverside County. He's been in law enforcement 38 years, since 2007. Now, elections are coming up, so folks keep that in mind. Let's push for him. He started in Coachella with the police force there, graduated into the Sheriff's office. Done a lot of remarkable work for us, with us. And his career in the Army, you can review that, Colonel. And he's our 13th Sheriff. So I'd like to turn the mic over to him. And he'll give us an incredible program this morning on, yes, Dale.
I just say one thing. For the kids, for the young people, Sheriff Sniff is elected. He's an elected official. Police departments are appointed. If he doesn't do a good job, he doesn't get reelected. And this is very important, particularly back in Washington, D.C., where I spent a half century. If you're elected, you got to perform, and he performs, and that's why he's important, and that's why he's here today.
Okay, is this live? Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good segue. I am elected. It's coming up in 2018, so you guys got a little bit of a breather. But be that as it may, I actually spend almost all my time on the road. And I'm going to pose a riddle to you a little bit about who the sheriff actually works for. So when you leave here, if you don't remember anything else, you'll be underscored with what Dell ended up indicating there. That if I do a good job in my agency, your sheriff's department does a good job, then I get reelected. And by and large, you're going to see the sum total of everything I go through this morning, which is going to be pretty rapid fire, and I hope to give some time for some question and answer, because you don't often get a chance to see a sitting sheriff eyeball to eyeball. But to that end, as far as my relationship with the public, I pretty much stayed nonstop on the road and probably broke the molds from many of the prior sheriffs that have served the great county of Riverside since 1893. And to that end, I've actually logged in some 300,000 miles since I took office on October 2nd, 2007. To my staff that work downtown in Riverside, my office is largely empty because I'm always out in the communities talking with groups like yourselves, both big and small. A lot of great issues of the day, and there's a lot of impact on every person that lives within Riverside County. All 2.3 million are impacted by how the Sheriff's Department operates for a variety of reasons that I'll cover this morning in a few minutes. I also took the liberty of leaving some of the Sheriff Stars, the lapel pins, everywhere I go. People have heard me talk, always clamor to get those little pins. A lot of people collect those. So I hope if any of you are interested, I left a pile of them at the table out there, and along with some business cards. Inevitably, I run out of time. So it's got my email address, it's got my assistant there, so if there's something that we missed today, or you have to leave early, or didn't get a chance, or were embarrassed to ask, God forbid, you're welcome to end up following up with some other questions that come to mind later on. I am accountable to every single one of you. The only thing is, I ask you on the pins. Some of my predecessors in the sheriff's departments in California have gotten themselves in trouble on handing out badges and things, so it's sized appropriately. But don't make any bad arrests, and you're going to find out anyway. I don't have any room in the jail. Don't cause us any embarrassment. And the other thing, it will not get you out of any trouble. So I know we have some people asking, if I have your business card or that lapel pin, that'll get me out of a ticket. And maybe with a high patrol, I doubt it, but certainly not with my own folks, it won't get you out of a ticket. So a little bit about the office of sheriff. As was indicated, is an elected position, and that makes all of us, all 58 sheriffs, 58 counties in California, directly accountable to the public that we end up serving. And it really makes no difference, you're going to hear in my comments, where you live, whether you live in one of our communities that are served by the Sheriff's Department as a contract policing agent, or you live in some of them that we work side by side with 11 separate city police departments across Riverside County that do a great job, or whether you live in the unincorporated area, the office of sheriff is important to the quality of life of every human being that lives within this county, now at over 2.3 million. Your county, Riverside, and as mentioned, I started on a police department out here because I grew up out here. So I was part of the Coachella Valley. My family were pioneers in the date citrus industry. Some of you remember just down past Shields, there used to be a whole series of date gardens all the way up through Indian Wells and into Palm Desert. A lot of that's gone now and been replaced by walled communities. And Goodness gracious, this old desert area here that I grew up in has just grown exponentially out here. And that's kind of a microcosm of what we've seen all across Riverside County. About 2/3 of the population base is actually in western Riverside County. But my goodness, some of us remember working in Palm Desert when Monterey actually did not even connect to the freeway. It was a dead-end road that used to cause most of us to go up there and point in the down direction as cars approached, to go up there and hide and write reports and so on. So a lot of great growth we've seen. And this county now is, if you didn't or weren't aware of it already, is the 4th largest in landmass. It's 7,300 square miles, about the size of the state of New Jersey. It's the 4th largest of any of the counties in California. And then population-wise, we're also now, where it didn't used to be, but we are also now the 4th largest in population of the 58 counties. And another little piece that kind of underscores the growth that we've had, this is now, and this started across from 11th to 10th, this is now the 10th most populous county anywhere in the United States. So, and the reason I cite that is that for any of us overseeing government services, whether it's law enforcement or other types of government services, over that size of a landmass, it's a pretty daunting task. And then when you couple in all the other things that the great state of California has done to us in the criminal justice system, particularly AB 109 realignment and also Prop 47, and now the rising crime rates that we're seeing all across California, probably kind of a no-brainer for most of us that you put all these things together and you have consequences when you don't hold people accountable or have deterrence in the criminal justice system. It's an incredible challenge right now dealing with a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues wherever I go in the communities, and some of you have already come up and expressed it to me about the angst that we have right now living in Southern California because of all these issues kind of coming together. So pretty much since I've been in office, I've had one challenge or another, whether it's been the Great Recession that impacted us, jail overcrowding, AB 109 that took place in 2011, on October 2011 when that actually took effect, and then also Prop 47 in late 2014. All that has made a severe challenge, not just for the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, but all the police agencies we serve side by side. So the riddle I often pose is, who does the sheriff work for? And I'll hear when I'm moving around the public, a lot of them say, well, you must work for the district supervisor, either individually or you work collectively for the board of supervisors like the rest of the county departments. And I'll tell you from the get-go, that's not accurate. And as my introduction's kind of laid out, the sheriff is accountable to the public. And if you think about the 5 district supervisors, all great individuals that I work very closely with, they each have 1/5 the electorate. There are 2 key offices in county governments throughout each of those 58 counties that are actually constitutional officers. One is the district attorney, and the other is the sheriff, who serves as the chief law enforcement officer to that county, elected by individuals every 4 years. All of us are aligned on the gubernatorial cycle, so every time the governor comes up, 57 of the 58 county sheriffs all come up on that same election cycle and are accountable. What might you guess, given today's politics, the one county that is out of step with everybody else?
San Francisco.
That's exactly right. San Francisco. And they're aligned at about 2 years different from that. But the rest of us are all aligned on the gubernatorial cycle. And so you get questions all the time, well, don't you have to follow the direction of the Board of Supervisors? And the answer is beep, no. In fact, both of us are empowered on your behalf, I might add, and on behalf of all the police chiefs that we serve alongside, to say no to the Board of Supervisors. Now, what is the one power the Board of Supervisors does have over the sheriff and DA, and of course all the other county department heads that are appointed? Money. They can add and subtract money. They have absolute fiduciary control over your taxpayer dollars and can add and subtract. There are limits to that. They can't do things that legally would put adverse impact to inmates that are in our custody, and you'll see that that's one of the functions of the office of sheriff. But they literally can't tell me what guns, what cars, what policies, who we're going to investigate. And I say that to you because that is an important check and balance in the criminal justice system that protects all of you. And it may seem kind of odd that a sheriff who's elected would be less political, the office would be less political than police departments. But as Del indicated, if you think about And I work with 11 great city police chiefs serving their communities as well. But they're all appointed. And all of you know what that term at will means. You can be fired for any cause. There's no property rights in your job as it is in the rest of civil service. But those police chiefs in this state typically work for a city manager, our version of a county executive officer. They work for a city manager who also is at will working for a council majority. And so when you stop and think about local control, that becomes a pro word often for corruption issues, because when somebody can be fired for whatever reason, particularly if they're not 50 years of age, they might be out selling insurance or shoes, or in a completely different profession if they get fired as a police chief. It's a heavy hammer that if you step on somebody or investigate somebody that's close to the power structure, that can end up being an inhibitor as far as your folks doing what they should. In the office of sheriff, our department, and you'll see the numbers here in a few minutes, is so massive and so big that, and I've got allies with all the city council members for the most part, and most of the mayors and the other apparatus, because that's what I deal with in dealing with community issues. But even if the city of Riverside, and Ron Leverage was a good friend of mine and an ally for many years before he retired and was replaced by Rusty Bailey. But I can guarantee you, if the mayor of Riverside, our biggest city in this county, needed to go to jail by our folks, there's nothing on this earth that's going to stop that. And that's a very powerful tool if you stop and think about even Steven cutting the law enforcement. And that's something that all of us desire, is enforcement of laws the same way. I've got one community that's a self-declared sanctuary city. I won't name which one, but all of you who live out here should know because it's not too far away. A nice community, but those community leaders came to me at one point a few years ago, and I know Danny will probably appreciate this and the other CHP officers being statewide law enforcement. But the question was dealing with impounds of cars, and they came to me because that particular community is one of our contract communities and said, you know, Sheriff, we want to do a different thing on vehicle impounds, i.e. change the vehicle code, and we want you to enforce it this way. And guess what the answer was from the sheriff? No. Well, we're a sanctuary city. That really doesn't matter to me whatsoever. My folks have a responsibility to enforce state law, the vehicle code and the penal code, the same way in your community and outside your community. And by the way, my authority is, even if we're not hired by you, I can go just like the highway patrol anywhere I choose in your community, but we're going to enforce the law the same way. And if you stop and think about that, that is a powerful check and balance to that so-called local control sometimes when they want to have different codes and hold people accountable a different way. All of us understand that's not a good way on that. And of course the threat was, well, maybe we won't hire you. Then fine. But as we're hired or as we come into your city, we're going to enforce the law the same way. So important thing on the department, I end up being accountable to every single one of you. I end up representing not only you each, all 2.3 million, but those police chiefs that are sometimes muzzled. They don't often get the opportunity to end up politically talking about the criminal justice issues of the day. By very nature, the office of sheriff does. And so I can articulate things for the police chiefs that they would probably get in trouble with because they're at will, with their political establishment. So it isn't a be all end all, but the office of sheriff, just like the office of district attorney, is an important check and balance in our criminal justice system. One of the things you're going to see in that so-called criminal justice system as I tick through our missions is the office of sheriff is very different from being a police department. If that was my sole job, and I have a massive police force of about 2,000 people that are involved in that, policing 17 of our 28 cities, and also one tribal reservation that contracts for its own deputy sheriffs, and also the unincorporated area. So just my patrol operations, as big as it is, impacts about 1.4 million folks out of the 2.3 million. And that's why when you see crime stats come out from the sheriff's office in mass, it isn't the be-all, tell-all of everything that's going on in Riverside County, but it's a significant indicator of where crime is going throughout Riverside County, just like it is in any of the other counties. Now, our department, your sheriff's office, has more cities than any other sheriff's department except for Los Angeles. So our department, your sheriff's department, is now larger as a sheriff's office than San Bernardino, way larger than Imperial County, our neighbor to the east and south. And then our department is going to run neck and neck back and forth with San Diego County because they're in a massive jail building and hiring spree. We soon will be, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. And then, of course, even Orange County, we end up being a larger sheriff's office. What does that stem from? Well, that growth we talked about at the very beginning. This county has exploded in size with a lot of cities, much of which we end up doing the policing responsibility for, and that's caused a lot of growth. The other area you're going to see is in jails. Now, under the law in California, and you may be from another state, and there are some states back east where the sheriff is elected, but not even considered peace officers underneath their penal codes. In California, we are. So all my comments about what a sheriff is may have nothing to do if you come back from another state back east. I can talk in great detail about California. So all the stuff we're going to talk about, my legal responsibilities, are all specific to California sheriffs, all 58 of those county sheriffs. So what are my legal responsibilities in California? One is to respond, and the language used to be, and still is, but we use it in a different frame. Respond to breaches of the peace in the unincorporated area. Now, in modern parlance, that means we investigate crimes. And as I mentioned, there's about 400,000 people that live every place outside the city, sometimes in little communities that are outside the city limits, but oftentimes in remote areas, mountaintops, dirt roads, no street lamps, no house numbers. Wherever a crime occurs outside the cities, my fundamental responsibility is to handle those crime investigations. The staffing, even though we often term it as patrol deputies, the reality is that staffing is controlled by the Board of Supervisors. Just like the higher patrol staffing and density of officers across the state, it's controlled by the state. In our county, the Board of Supervisors determine how many deputies are going to be out there. Typically, we do a staffing ratio. Typically, you will see in Riverside County, and I've been with the department now since 1979, and so I've seen going up and going down. I've seen the surges when we got a lot of deputies and they had a lot of excess money that they dumped in, made things very proactive, fast response times, drives crime down, and I've seen, like we're about to see here over the next 6 months, where we go down to the nubs. We did that once in 2011. So I have 10 patrol stations right across Riverside County. One of them in Central County, as an example, a station in Hemet, has 800 square miles of responsibility. Now think closely. The minimum staffing levels we have, and we're going to soon see this by probably around December, because I've been hit with some pretty good budget cuts, and that money will come out of those discretionary areas. Visualize this. On the clock at any given time for 800 square miles, and their area covers all the way up to Pine Cove and Idlewild, all the way out to Sage and near Anza. So it's a big area, and many of it's sparsely populated, but people deserving of also to see patrol cars out there in black and whites. 2 deputy sheriffs for 800 square miles at any given time. So what I'm telling you is, and sometimes we've had as high as 5 and 6, which is much better. We did that in actually 2008, shortly after I took office. We had a tremendous surge where we fielded a lot of deputies, and then we got hit by the recession. So long response times, and you'll hear that a lot in county sheriff's departments. The old line used to be 1 deputy, 1 riot. You know, we had all those things growing up through the ranks on that. But a lot of ability to use the gift of gab and trade space for time, kind of like the cavalry mission. For those of you that have served in the Army know that they're travel light, and they move very quickly, but they trade space for time. And you learn a lot of gift of gab on doing that. So the unincorporated area is going to go down. It's running now about 3 or 4 deputies for that 800 square miles, to give you a visual. It's going to be pretty tough. Now, why would any of you that live in a city give a rip? Well, those type of same densities are going to be out here in the Coachella Valley all the way to the Colorado River. And any place that gives safe harbor to crooks, because the crooks don't recognize any boundaries. I think all of us know that. It is not a good thing for any of our communities, but that's the fiscal pinch that the county has found itself in, and I'll show you why in a few minutes as well. So each of the cities, like Palm Desert and Indian Wells and Rancho Mirage out here, they contract with the Sheriff's Department. At our cost, which is largely labor cost, they get a great deal. And even though our costs have gone up a lot over the last couple of years, the reality is they're the most cost effective. Really no different than a mom and pop business trying to compete with Stater Brothers. The sheer economy of scale, patrol cars, all the equipment, the training facilities, all those areas. it makes it very, very ineffective for many of these smaller police departments. Doesn't mean they're bad or good, it's just they're much more expensive to operate and typically much more top-heavy than our agency provides. It is a very, very cost-effective deal, but make no mistake, both fire and law enforcement services this day and age, and a lot of it's driven by the liability issues. You'll see any of our agencies that carry armed folks that go out in harm's way, the cost of liability these days, because the circumstances that our state government operate in, the liability laws and all the rest of it, extremely expensive. Even if you're well-founded, I get shootings that cost me $7 million and we haven't done anything wrong, but that's taxpayer dollars that goes for one reason or another. And usually it goes just like those of you that have private businesses. The slip and falls, the insurance companies pretty much dictate that, and they scare the hell out of almost everybody by saying, you know, we're going to cover this if you strike a deal for $7 million, but the liability could potentially be $25 million. If you choose to end up fighting it, then you're going to absorb that entire liability. And so it's a little bit like an extortion game, but when you see that nonsense, whether it's a highway patrol or the sheriff's office or Palm Springs Police Department, you got to remember those are business decisions for the most part, but they still cost me money, and they make things very, very expensive on the public safety sector. So I respond to breaches of the peace in the unincorporated area. I do modern policing, which includes traffic components in our contract cities. Today's sheriff's office, about 75% of our patrol force, very different from what it was years ago, don't do the county mounting part I was talking about, but they actually do modern city policing. Criminal, traffic, and enforce local ordinances. The cities are very different from the county because they pay at our cost whatever level of service. So they want to put a deputy sheriff on every street corner and they can pay for it, it makes no difference. So the staffing levels and the ability to be very proactive and very visible and to do anything that community wants, okay, is very flexible on that. But it's very different from the things that you hear about the 2 or 3 or 4 deputies for 800 square miles where there's built-in long response times. I've got now about 2,000 people. You'll see that some of you come up and look at this chart later because I know it's a little bit of a large group. But as an example, in the sheriff's office, I use one assistant sheriff that oversees 2,000 employees, a budget over $320 million. My budget total is about $700 million this year. That's how much taxpayer dollars that jet fuel will keep our 747 afloat with all its moving parts. About half my staff deal with it. One of my chief deputies, Shelley Kennedy Smith, on the west end of the county, oversees more people than double the size of the Riverside Police Department. And Chief Sergio Diaz, a great guy, but he's also got a number 2 and 2 number 3s. She does it by herself with a field of captains out there, and that's the part of how we operate so leanly. And even the desert region out here is almost the same size as the entire Riverside Police Department under one chief deputy on that. So a lot of responsibility, a lot of your taxpayer dollars, a lot of issues with people, constitutional rights, and carrying guns. I deal with search and rescues. The police departments don't. And for the aviation folks that are interested in what our department does, we've got 6 rotary and 1 fixed-wing Cessna. The Eurocopter is a state-of-the-art digital helicopter that's equipped with FLUR and all the other modern accoutrements, including ground links to end up dealing directly with the ground commanders on those issues. I deal with so many search and rescues, and that's why I have high-performance aircraft that can winch people off the tallest mountains in this area, in the most remote desert areas, and can fly at night, fully equipped. I deal with search and rescues every 2 days. I have 150 to 170 search and rescues. Palm Springs has a few, as you know, from the tramway, and they'll get a couple of them, but we dwarf everybody else. And really, none of the other police departments end up having to deal with that. But that is a responsibility in that unincorporated area of those deputy sheriffs. You may be from another state, as I mentioned, where the federal government polices Native American lands. There's about 110 tribes here in California, and I've got 12 of those tribes that we interface with. You may not understand that, but you remember, probably a few of you that remember I had a confrontation with one of the tribes on the other end that tried to block the Highway Patrol, Hemet Police Department, and us, and also were shooting at us. and I had to end up having a high stare blink down, and we didn't blink down. But there was a lot at stake in that confrontation, and it's turned around now with that particular tribe, but it's one of those things that we had to administer tough love. In California, federal law requires local law enforcement to deal with criminal investigations on Native American lands. The feds do not police in California tribal lands. If the sheriff, which these are largely in the unincorporated area, Palm Springs has Agua Caliente as well as we do, but most of these are in the unincorporated area. If the sheriff did not end up pushing that, those tribal lands would be no man's land. And as you know, a lot of them have casinos. There are a lot of people that have entrance and egress. There are some laws because they are sovereign, but it is a limited sovereignty. They're still subject to California law and U.S. law. And so it's not like it's a completely separate nation on that. But it is absolutely critical that we end up having the ability to enter and egress out of those Native American lands to end up conducting criminal investigations. And as I mentioned, one tribe, Morongo, actually hires their own deputies, just like the city of Palm Desert and Indian Wells and Lakita and Coachella and Rancho Mirage do. They have their own deputies working side by side. There are no California recognized peace officers, unless they're reserves, in California in those tribal police. And the tribal police can say whatever. They can arm them with guns, but they cannot enforce California law. They can't book into our county jails, and they can't prosecute people. That has to be done by California peace officers. So that's the other thing, 12 tribes as well. So that occupies a big chunk of our folks. So what's left on those missions? There's 3 more. One of them is I end up providing court security, and we were talking at the table. We used to have an East and a West Marshal that was elected out here in Riverside County. Most of the state has merged Marshal's offices into the much bigger Sheriff's offices. And so there are some 90 courtrooms spread across our 7,300 square miles that by law, I am required to provide the security for those courtrooms, to act on behalf of those judges, and to serve the civil papers that go out and throughout all the communities. That is my legal responsibility. The third area is the coroner's office. We used to have a separate elected. Those of you that are old timers remember a separate elected coroner. Most of the counties in California, some 48 of them now, the 58, the sheriff also serves now as the coroner public administrator. Makes it for a little bit tricky because that used to be part of the checks and balances on investigation of deaths, including deaths in custody. But I now have that responsibility and have for, even through my predecessors for quite a while now, is serving as sheriff, coroner, public administrator. The fourth area that I'm responsible by law is jails. Not a sexy thing, but under the law in California, that is the legal responsibility of the sheriff of each of those counties. We have 5 facilities here. It is a very busy, overcrowded jail system. Probably about half the size that it should be, particularly after realignment then caused us to also turn them into housing people that normally would be at the state prison. That saved the state a lot of money. It's cost us a lot more money here, and we are badly overcrowded. Your jail system here in Riverside County, again going back to my opening comments about all that explosive growth, is badly overcrowded. It's part of that lights, streets, parks, all those type of things that are amenities throughout all our communities that lag behind infrastructure. Jails is part of that critical one. Your jail system here in Riverside County receives 60,000, that's 60,000 adults every single year, whether they're booked in by the California Highway Patrol, the other state agencies, any of the police departments, or the sheriff's department, or anybody else that enforces state law inside of Riverside County. That is the front end of the criminal justice system. And so it is critical, and that's also why those jails are all co-located with courts, because there's an ebb and flow. And one of the great misunderstandings, I think, out there, and when I deal with a lot of community groups is, you know, why do these people have all these rights and why are there constitutional issues in the jail? Well, think about what a jail is. It receives people being arrested and taken off the street, not going home to pick up their meds and all the other things, and booked into the county jail. And so that jail typically houses about 2/3 of its inmates have not been convicted of anything. They're awaiting trial. A state prison, which is for the more serious offenses, used to be only felonies. Now it's only the severe felonies, because some of the other felonies are housed here in the county jail after realignment. they're 100% convicted. And as you saw a few years ago when they got sued, they got crippled all the way up to the United States Supreme Court because of health and mental health issues. So medical issues, having access to all that stuff, and whether we want to debate that or not, the courts dictate a lot about how that's going to be as far as treatment of that. But it becomes even more critical on county jails, because that's somebody's grandma that's been booked in for drunk driving, that didn't go back home, get their insulin and their blood pressure medicine. And so it's got everything from a murderer being booked in, awaiting trial, all the way up to somebody that's been arrested for simple DUI out there on our streets. And it's got the whole gamut of everything in between. So our jail system now, since about 1992, 1993, has been under a federal court order because its size has never kept up with the county's growth. And so what happens is the federal court long ago directed my predecessors, Sheriff, you got to have a bed, a space for every inmate that's brought in that you're going to keep. If you don't, then you have to play Solomon and make a forced choice, and that will end their sentence. Now, a few years ago, you saw a horrendous number of people being released prematurely by the actions of my folks working directly for me, micromanaging that stuff. And so you saw almost 12,000, 13,000 people released in 1 year in this county, booked into the system, but because there's no room in it, that pressure relief valve was kicking them out prematurely right back out in the streets. You couple that with realignment, where things have been progressively decriminalized, and the impact has been on our county jails. In other words, when you're sentenced to what used to be a felony that sent you to state prison, you're now stuck in the county jail. That added a lot of volume. And then when you see Prop 47 that hit, that decriminalized a lot of stuff, including drug issues and so on, all the hammer that we used to have on deterrence is pretty much slipped away in this state. And now you're also seeing, no surprise, the crime rate starting to go back up. Why? Because the men and women that are working on the front lines are arresting the same people over and over and over again, and there is little or no deterrent. In fact, the crooks frequently quote to our officers, whether blue or tan and green, they'll cite the section on that saying, well, I don't have enough here that you can end up arresting me for. You have to give me a ticket. And that, I'm making a joke a little bit, but it's not. It's become very, very serious for a lot of us. That breeding of contempt, you're seeing more and more. Not only in pursuits where people just basically blow off law enforcement, but also resisting arrests, incidents where they're not complying with the officers. You're seeing that across the nation, as we've seen a lot of this stuff come back against basically authority in all different forms. Odd time in our communities. So what's the good news? And then I got some more bad news for you. Part of my job, I guess. The good news is that facility, to add some relief to our jail system here, is coming out of the ground there across the Larsen Justice Center. That East County Detention Center will replace the old Indio jail, and it will add a net gain of about 1,300 beds to our jail system. Our jail system right now has a little less than 4,000. So we will still be quite a bit less than our neighbor to the north, San Bernardino, which is about 3 times our land mass. But San Bernardino is smaller in population than Riverside County these days. And so we're a busier county. So we are still going to have too small a jail system. But to the end that the board was able to cobble together $220 million, and this is the artist's rendition of what that's going to look like in the middle of 2018. The Sheriff's Department got a $100 million grant from the state of California to offset some of the damage caused by AB 109 and all our early releases. So this jail is going to end up costing us about $330 million, okay? So the other part of the good news is Sheriff Stan is going to end up having a lot of jobs added, because I got to add the staff to our existing staff. Now my payroll will increase when this thing is in full blossom by another 400. So those of you that know young men and women that are interested in law enforcement, we're going to have some great jobs. We have jobs right now, but I'm going to give you the bad news in here in a minute. But we have a lot of great jobs that we're still hiring for now, and in a huge department. So there's great opportunities for young women and young men and women to become a career law enforcement officer, whether it's civilian or as a correctional deputy or a sworn deputy sheriff that's armed with arrest powers on it. So 400 staff, A lot of folks out here. This is a Coachella Valley Job Fest. I'm going to probably have people coming from all over the county and even outside the county for some of those jobs, because those jobs are very well paying right now. So the downside I've got is I've been zeroed out on hiring any people this year and last year, because you've been watching the papers. The county has gotten itself in a fiscal ditch. Anybody have any idea about why the county's in a fiscal ditch right now, other than the people that were talking to me at the table? What's that?
Property tax increase.
Well, the big issue is there's a lot of ties with labor unions now with all the politicals, whether the city or even on the county side. And what has happened over the last couple of years, those who've been following the county doldrums, about a year ago they suddenly found out they didn't have any money. This last fiscal year coming into this fiscal year, the Sheriff's Department for the first time, even though its costs are going up, just like the other county departments, just like some of the police departments, labor costs have driven up all our costs. In fact, in my department, your sheriff's office, this represents my payroll, and get this is for about 4,000 employees. That first year when I was in office, we had about 4,000 full-time employees and about 1,600 volunteers that help us, otherwise we'd be in deeper trouble. This is my payroll for this fiscal year. Same number of employees. So you're seeing a 200 million, and that's the intervening years between October of 07 and that first fiscal year and this. The intervening years had a recession, but what happened was all our labor groups in the county got a lot of different increases. Even though many of the cities contracted, the county didn't. And so the county, which lost at the high point of the recession about 25% of their revenue, they now have 100% of their revenue, and suddenly they're facing a ditch where the sheriff and others, and you probably watched this in the budget debate, on the West End it's been a hot topic on it, and that's why I've been zeroed last year and this year. And like anything else, those of you who serve in the military, it takes a running start. You don't wait till you open the doors and then hire the people, including the leadership, to run a complicated facility like that. Even more complicated for all of us, these things are very complex. They never work right. They're expensive to build. The state dictates how we build them and how we operate them. And if you deviate, of course, like most of us, you get your bell rung or provide a lotto to the inmates. But this jail facility right now is scheduled to only be partially open in 2018. And so I'll get hammered with questions. You'll hear about maybe in a year, you'll start seeing as this jail becomes more and more finalized, you know, Stan, how's it going to be? You guys going to be ready? You badly need that 1,300 additional inmate space. Are you going to be able to do it? And guess what my answer is going to be? Well, I think you all know. No. We'll be lucky if we can open a quarter of that $330 million facility on time that we needed yesterday. And so that will be a big issue. But that issue of where they're going to get the money, I have no idea. We wanted to hire a few people this year. It's not. So I'm still hiring. I'm going to continue to hire because I lose about 200 staff a year and I have to offset. We're going to get pinched a little bit, like I said, in the unincorporated area. And that's the good and the bad news on where the jails are going. We desperately need, this will not be the end of it. Even when we finish this, we still will need probably another 1,500 beds after that to stay current with what Riverside County. And remember, the county is continuing to grow just like the state is. And there are more laws that the legislature seems to want to pass every year. But nobody seems to want, whether they don't want to add to the prison system or add to local county jails. They're darn expensive to build, but people want to keep passing laws to make more things a crime, or increase the sanctions on existing crimes, because they all get to hang a scalp off their belt in the legislature on that stuff, but nobody's paying the freight on this stuff as far as impacting the system. So why is the cost going up? Why do we see that kind of cost? If you look at the raises that the departments had, why, if you live in one of our cities, you've ended up having increased contract rates. because those costs that the board negotiates with these labor unions, and that's their power, just like city councils negotiate with city labor unions, they've gone up. And what you're seeing is, this chart here goes all the way back to when I first took office, just like that other chart. These are the 4 labor groups that I've had. And you can see cumulative through their agreements. And God bless my folks, they deserve over every dime. But when the sheriff is being told, or the district attorney is being told they have to dismantle parts of their department because there's no longer enough money for raises being granted, that's not keeping both feet in the stirrups on both sides. And that's not watching the checkbook very closely. For whatever the reason was, it's caused a huge challenge. So, those of you that have been familiar with what's gone on in the recession, this labor group here now have had cumulatively, it's into this next year now, they've had 74% increase in their basic salary over just since I've been in office, not before, after I came into office. The deputy sheriff's group, I now have 260 deputy sheriffs, patrol car operators. And this will scare you, Danny, because it's not like the pay we made back then. At top step, a deputy sheriff today, and that's with a college degree at advanced post, takes about 5 years to get there. 103 is their basic pay and allowances. Most of them pick up another 15 to 20,000 in overtime, and benefits of about 40,000 bucks that the county taxpayers pay is on top of that. That's the unit cost. We're not talking about the sheriffs and the sergeants and the lieutenants and the detectives. I'm talking about people operating black and whites. And we operate in a market that is always going to be competitive. In other words, Riverside Police Department just got a big raise because they were looking at the Sheriff's Department, which is sitting at the high end. You're looking at some agencies out here, like Desert Hot Springs, that you watch go through a fiscal challenge here, and they slash the budget and cut their pay back. All of our budgets are based on people costs. 90% of my budget is people costs, not paper clips, but people costs, none of which I control or negotiate. But when I'm turned around and told, Stan, you may have to shut down your aviation, your bomb team, your SWAT teams to help pay for these raises that we end up giving that we didn't have the money for, that is not a good balance or keeping both feet in those stirrups. So to dramatize that, this is what a W-2 looks like of a top step deputy. Again, since I've been in office. And for those of you that can't see it back there, their regular salaries when I first took office, and this is off of real W-2, this is a real deputy sheriff at top step, $72,000. 2015, last W-2 for that very same individual, $96,000. And that, in a nutshell, is a challenge that myself and the other people in the public safety sector, we don't control or negotiate those things. It's done by the Board of Supervisors, all good people, but not watching closely on that. So I'm going to end up pausing here a little bit. I can go on in a variety of different directions, but I'm more interested in wherever you guys want to go on questions. We'll go in the back.
Those rescues you were talking about, do you ever recover anything from those?
Oh, good question. What he asked was, on those rescues that I mentioned, 150 to 170 lost hikers alone that we end up dealing with, we do recover. If we can show that there's some type of negligence, and not all of them are, and we have to treat in California, the requirements on the mutual aid system is we treat every search and rescue as an emergency. And most of the time you don't know, so you throw in the assets, and we don't end up playing games with people's lives like that, and we take it at worst case, including using a lot of very skilled volunteers that technically cost no money, but yank them from their jobs to go out there and recover these folks. What we get to do is, and we do in fact do that, on the negligent ones, bill the county that they are a resident of. And reciprocally, those counties, when our folks run amiss out in their county, are also billed. So whether the county then chooses to go after somebody individually, civilly, is a completely different matter. But those numbers that I just mentioned as far as getting money back from that county of residents are very small, because the requirement for us is to show negligence. You know, somebody that doesn't take foodstuffs or proper clothing. You saw one in Orange County not too long ago when they were out there smoking dope and they got some people hurt. But those are really the exception, not the rule. But good question.
I don't know much about it, but I read in the paper that the federal government, like the state and local police, don't cooperate with the federal government, especially for ICE and
Well, that varies across, there are some sanctuary communities, technically, if you don't have any cooperation. Now, in California, other than one sheriff's department, which city would that county be? Yeah, there's a little bit of debate you saw on that one, but the other 57 sheriffs are pretty much uniform on it. One thing that all of you need to understand, because I end up seeing a lot of the blogs, not everything that's a crime is enforceable by any particular group. The feds enforce certain types of crimes. They have their own lockups, federal courts as well, to deal with those violations. Most things are done in the state court, and so those of us that are sworn to uphold state laws, which don't enforce immigration, by the way, we enforce those state laws, and that's what allows people to be booked into a county jail. Just so all of you understand, for violations of immigration, you cannot be booked into a county jail. No county jail. It's not a state offense. Can you be booked into a federal lockup? Yes. And just like some of the federal drug laws, you're booked into federal lockups. So it has to have a nexus with a state crime. So that being said, let's say you're an illegal immigrant and you've been booked for burglary. Our requirement in California is, and you know, some people are opposed to that, but we're going to get our pound of flesh, so to speak. If you rape or rob or murder somebody, we're not just going to, and I get that all the time, why don't you just ship them to Mexico? Well, how does that work? There's no accountability with that. No, we're going to prosecute them, even if they're here illegally, for our crime. And then we're going to get our pound of flesh, whether they're sentenced or found not guilty or whatever. We're going to end up extracting that. The question becomes, once that's been adjudicated and they've served their time, can I hold them for an immigration offense? I cannot. It's no different than when folks making an illegal arrest. So, going back to your point, how do you then deal with the feds when they want somebody? Well, we work very closely with ICE, and most of the counties in California do. We're a little bit hindered about holding somebody unlawfully, because that puts your taxpayer dollars at risk. So on the detainers, where they used to say, just like a warrant, we're going to hold them for 48 hours just on our federal allegation, the courts have told us we can no longer do that. That puts me at jeopardy, it puts your taxpayer dollars. So the workaround is that in your county here that we do, if the feds want somebody and they're going to be there to pick them up, we have no problem. They walk out in the lobby and they'll be scooped right up. If they want us to illegally hold them, like for a day or 2 days, that is a time bomb that we can't end up doing. That's a hand grenade where you pull the pin on it, and we will end up being sued, and have been sued before, just like the other agencies. So we will still work, but just like the Highway Patrol that are very thinly deployed across California, federal ICE officers are also very thin. So they can't be at every place at all time. But we do communicate, we do work with them when we can. Your deputy sheriffs, your city police officers, your other state law enforcement officers, they cannot detain somebody or hold them any more than they can make a false arrest out in the field. So we'll see federal law enforcement officers in cars. They have the power to do that. We do not. But you cannot be booked into a county jail in California for an immigration offense. That's probably a little bit complex, but I hope that eases that up. But we try to work around those things as workarounds.
Yeah, but a little different. Up in Anza area, there seems to be a escalation of commercial marijuana grows, and I'm just wondering, it's all a cash economy apparently, and who polices those individuals and their activities?
We do, and we roll them up. In fact, we just had a series of arrests out there, and everything. Now, everybody's kind of concerned, and all of you see the same polls I do. None of us in law enforcement support this, but I think we can see what's coming in the state, like some of the other liberal patterns on that. And unfortunately, we'll be hand-tied on the state side on enforcing state law on that. But for as long as this continues to be illegal, we're going to continue to, and we work, one of the tools that all of us have, the city police departments, the sheriff's offices, and the feds have, and think about this, because one of the things I'm going to have to vacate in part of my budget cuts this year is these teams and task forces. The workaround we have and have used for years is I will partner, San Bernardino Sheriff, Indio Police Chief, Palm Springs, we will all partner with federal law enforcement. Why? Think about what I just said. Because they can enforce many of these federal laws, and that's why those joint teams and task forces not just for counterterrorism, but for drug issues and so on, why those are so critical. Because whether we book them into a county jail or we book them into a federal lockup, it is a heavy hammer. And typically, the sheriff, the police chiefs, and the DA will utilize on violent gangs whatever the hammer is heaviest. And if we can get a federal charge to send them away longer, then we end up doing it. Now, all of you are well aware that the federal government has had a change in direction on marijuana, even though it's a Schedule I drug, just like they've had on immigration, going back and forth. They have not been particularly helpful in a lot of that stuff because the politics out of the White House and whoever occupies it drives a lot of that federal prosecution issue on it. So they've not always been the best of partners, and I'm not speaking disrespectfully. I'm just saying that they changed directions on where their priorities. And a few years ago, we had 120 dispensaries pop up here in old Riverside County, all over. And you know what the biggest hammer was? Not incarceration. The biggest hammer is when those U.S. attorneys sent the owners of businesses, if you end up renting out to one of those dispensaries, we're going to seize your property, commercial property, under asset forfeiture. That is far more of a penalty than sending somebody to jail and having the sheriff kick them out early. But that is no longer in place right now. The federal government's backed off and hand-tied those U.S. attorneys on that, even though it's still a federal crime. So I don't, that probably, but we are end up right now until the laws change, we're rolling up, and we've made a lot of arrests out in Anza. Meat Valley's another one where we see that cash out. San Bernardino County and all the rural areas, and certainly up north in California, everybody is still busy, but it is a cottage industry.
So what, they're just getting ready for this election?
No, but
they're actually running a commercial grow and it's legal?
No.
Or is it somehow?
No, they're not legal, and we're rolling them up. In fact, even the tribes right now, because of the sovereignty issue, that's come up where they want to do commercial grows. But wherever we have these commercial grows, the state has very strict laws on how many plants you can do for medicinal marijuana. But these big time ones, as soon as we find them, we're burning them on down. We end up booking those people if we can get them. But we're still wiping out marijuana where we see. What happens after November, I don't know yet, when the law ends up changing, because that's going to hurt us all. Do you have a question?
How, in the funding end of it, how do all the part-time residents here affect your funding expenses?
Well, those of you who live part-time, that whatever the impact is fiscally to that community, that's what it is. Some of them use TOT, some of them use sales tax. You're watching right now a lot of cities having to, well, they have their own police department or hire us. The costs are escalating. So even sitting still, like you go into the market, you're going to see increased costs on things. So a lot of people think that things can stay the same. The reality is, even for highly paid folks like our law enforcement folks, the argument I would have is this has gone up too high and put the county in jeopardy. But other communities are going to the same thing. But to think that you're going to be able to keep those costs forever down, it doesn't work. So you're seeing a variety of tools right now that the cities are using. The county right now has not looked at any of that, but they probably will at some point. They have to.
Sheriff, how do you get an application to carry a gun?
Well, real good question on the gun issues here, because California, as you know, that's another area that is going the other way. They just had a whole host of very strict laws now that make us far, far stricter than any other state in the nation, even far more than New York. And it's unfortunate. I grew up here shooting in the mud hills and been a shooter all my life and reload ammunition and been a competitive shooter when I have better vision. And I still compete, but just not very effectively. So those things are near and dear. When I came into office, we had 400 or 500 gun permits. The gun permit thing is not a permit to own a handgun. In California, you can own, unless you're in a banned category, you can own a firearm under your Second Amendment rights in your home and place of business, including carrying it concealed and carrying it loaded. It's when you take it out into the public way, on the roadways, and go into the markets, go into the movie theaters, and sports events, you have to have a carry concealed permit. Every jurisdiction can issue those, so the City of Indio police chief can issue CCWs, any of the police chiefs, and of course the county sheriff. And like I told you earlier, the county sheriff's authority is throughout all the communities, including the different cities. And so I end up having the brunt of those. Unfortunately, most of the police, all the police departments really, all 11 of them, don't want to end up diverting scarce resources, because many of them have been hit with budget cuts, to do CCW processing. I do it because I support it. And so we issue a lot. I have over 2,100 permits. It's probably 4 times than the record of any predecessor that I had. And there's still more to be had. But I've got 2 people pulled off patrol duties, and I got through telling you, I'm going to be really hurting on patrol. By all rights, I should can that unit and put them back handling calls from the public. I'm not, because there's a huge amount of interest in CCWs, but I have a huge backlog. Right now, we're booked till 2018 on interviews. I'm going to try and find some additional retired resources that can come in and help break up the logjam. But we have just, in California, anybody that issues, Los Angeles doesn't, San Diego doesn't, Orange County just reverted back to their prior very harsh stance on it. The Peruta case that just came back from the appellate courts basically underscored that it's still in the hands of the police chief. It's my discretion, good cause, plus good moral character, both of which you could probably drive a Mack truck through as far as having loopholes in it. But it still is mine. We end up supporting and giving out CCWs. You can get it at our website, and those of you who pick up the business card at www.riversidesheriff.org, you can actually pull it up and download the thing. I would encourage all of you that are interested in CCWs, because we grant them at a very high rate, probably 97, 98%. But there are some people I'm not going to issue a CCW to, and that hurts some of their feelings. But there are some people out there that we do a background, and we're very thorough on that we know that it's just not in the public's interest. Because I then put my name and prestige of the department, and that CCW, the ability to carry a loaded, concealed weapon underneath your car seat, in the glove box, on your person, that allows you anywhere in the state of California. Which is ironic, because some of them, like San Francisco and Los Angeles, don't issue at all. So somebody with a Riverside County CCW can go into Los Angeles when their own residents could not get a CCW from the police department or the sheriff's office. So very uneven in California. Part of that's the difference between rural and urban areas. But I would encourage any of you that, if you forget what I say here and you pick up my card, then Jessica on the back of my card can steer you to the right folks. I get nothing but kudos from those 2 guys, but they are just working their rear ends off on, we're just drowning in CCW applications. That's why it's so backlogged. Ever since the December 2nd terrorist incident in San Bernardino, it's been a cottage industry. Even the state background system, the live scan, is backed up 5 months. That used to be a month. That's how much demand right now. And that's underscores the angst the public has right now in California, kind of as a result of all those things we hastily talked about.
We're going to have to
I
cut
just
this off.
want to say, I spent a half century in Washington, D.C. I wish the entire Congress could have been here today to hear this man.
We've been very fortunate today with Sheriff here. I'd like to remind everybody to sign the poster back at the back as an appreciation to the sheriff taking the time for this. Thank you very much.
And I'll stay here if any of you got some more questions and want to come up. And thanks for your attention on it. And those men and women that you see, whether they're wearing all tan or blue uniforms or tan and green, you all owe them a debt of gratitude. And I didn't spend a lot of time, but all of you read the newspapers, and it's obviously no secret across the United States that unlike what it was on 9/11, where the military, firefighters, law enforcement were put on a pedestal, we're taking a tremendous beating right now. And those kids, just attracting them to want to come into this type of work right now with the national debate and the attacks on law enforcement, the ambushes on that, it's really a very, very tough job. So thanks for your attention, and thank you for all you do in your communities as well.